Well, this year, as I was thinking about what to share on a Good Friday message, and there's, of course, so many things you can talk about, so many different moments and pictures leading up to the cross that you can think of, I was drawn to a particular person that's featured in all four of the Gospels regarding the crucifixion of Jesus, and that is Pontius Pilate. In a way, he's one of the most described figures of the Gospels that is not Jesus or his disciples. You know a lot more about him than so many figures as far as those who are not followers of Jesus are concerned. And so I was drawn, maybe because we're in such a political time where everyone's thinking about politics, about presidents, about rulers and who should be in charge and the heart of a nation and all those things. I was just drawn to Pontius Pilate and who he was and what he represented. And so it's a little bit unusual in the sense that we're going to look at the cross sort of from the perspective of Pontius Pilate. But I hope as we do that, we sort of see ourselves in one of the roles and all the witnesses of the crucifixion account, that we might see ourselves here in this man. And here's how I want to frame it. And this is something I've heard a lot as I've tried to interact with people about questions of the existence of God and can I trust the Bible and all these things. And I get kind of this idea that people think that if God would just show himself to me, then I would believe. If I could just be right there and he would pop up in front of me and tell me something or do something, fine, then I would believe. But until that happens, well, I'm going to remain a skeptic or an atheist or agnostic or a part of some other religion. And I want to sort of address that question. Why doesn't God respond to that arrogant demand to show himself and prove himself in the eyes of unbelieving skeptics? After all, we just heard a story about how God did prove himself in the Old Testament with a contest, demonstrating very vividly that he is God. He is Yahweh, the one who made heaven and earth. And I want to start off just by saying this, and you never know on a Good Friday who is here and who knows what. But let's just say this. Most people, if God would appear in front of them, we cannot immediately assume that they're going to believe God. For one thing, people hear voices. People have delusions. So how do you know you can trust your own senses? That if you told me, well, God did appear in front of me and he did this and that, well, there are reasons sometimes not related to anything divine that can happen. Some people have brain disorders that cause them to hallucinate. Could be bad pizza that makes you just see things and feel things and hear things, right? Drugs and all kinds of different influences that people put in their body. I mean, if for you, someone just to say, if God showed up in front of me, I would believe, or for me to believe in God because someone else had that kind of experience, well, unfortunately, there's a lot of different explanations for why someone might claim that they've had that kind of experience. On the other hand, let's think about this as well. And this is all just preparatory. God is something totally unconstrained by physical laws. He's a nature beyond our human faculties. Like if you imagine God and he is somehow like us, then you're not thinking of God anyway. And if you think he's the kind of God that can just, let's say, show up like a genie, you're just not thinking of him the right way. Like how should God reveal himself to us? Well, I would argue he demonstrates who he is pretty consistently every single moment of every day. And the logic and wisdom of the laws of physics and the beauty of sunsets and songs, the power demonstrated by the millions and billions and trillions of stars and galaxies and nebulae. I mean, doesn't he demonstrate his power and might to us every morning, every day in this creation that we personally experience through a body and senses that can actually appreciate beauty and wisdom and power? So everyday existence is evidence of God. But even still, I know, People imagine, well, if I could just have a conversation with God, if he could just show up and sit himself down in front of me in some way, right here, right now, I would believe. But even still, I know they wouldn't. Part of Pontius Pilate's testimony in the Gospels is that he had that very opportunity. And I know, again, it's a little unusual to focus on the cross by way of this man, one of the most directly responsible people for Jesus' death. But he had a unique experience with Jesus on that first Good Friday. And I think that does give us a unique angle on humanity's dealings with God, especially if we imagine ourselves, this enlightened 21st century people where there's not a single thing you could not Google. There's not a single almost place on the planet where you could not, get a satellite image. I think if we look at Pontius Pilate, we will see a little bit of ourselves. So we already read John 19, and I wanted to make sure to get that account in, but we're going to look at John 18, just a few moments before what being read earlier. John chapter 18, verses 33 through 38. John 18:33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him." Consider first why Pilate is an adequate, let's say, representative of some of the best that humanity has to offer. In other words, why can we sort of say that if Pilate could stand there and reason in front of Jesus and reject him, that really anyone would stand there and try to reason before Jesus and still reject him? Well, he is a governor in one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen, the Roman Empire. Of course, he was trained in philosophy and war. The position actually at the time was a military force, but he functioned in some of the administration, collection of taxes, keeping the peace. But he was primarily, this was a military position, but in the Roman Empire, such men were always going to be trained in philosophy and war, negotiation and force. He had the power of life and death over his domain, Judea, and he wouldn't have been someone who would have done things for money necessarily. He had plenty of that. We don't necessarily get the picture that he was greedy or even that he was overly ambitious, but that he was, he was over the province, a very important province there in Israel, or what we call Israel now. So most of us would say Pilate should have been more than adequate to, let's say, judge who Jesus was. Yet Pilate demonstrates the kind of pride and foolishness in himself that we all share. And it's inherent in this very thing, the idea that God must answer to us. Who gets to ask the questions here? Pilate. Pilate's the one who thinks he gets to ask the questions. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, if God were really God, does it make sense that we would be the ones interrogating him? Like if he appeared to me while I was out on a walk or sitting in my office, is it really the one who should be asking questions me? Some 41-year-old, guy that grew up in Orange County. All of a sudden, I get to be the one. Well, no, not me, but Pilate, maybe him, because he's a Roman governor. He's got a lot of power and authority. It doesn't matter who you are. If God is really God, and we ask him to prove himself to us, what we're actually proving or exposing is our foolishness and pride. Because that's ego that would say to God, tell me. You made me, but you need to answer to me. And that audacity is something that's built into us. Now, in a way, he doesn't know per se that he is, we'll get to this in a second, God in the flesh, but that phrase, King of the Jews, it means something. It means something very important. The King of the Jews, the Messiah of the Old Testament, was not just a king, someone who had a kingdom and ruled, but he was actually going to be the Messiah, a God king. Caesar claimed to be a God king, so it's not like Pilate would have been unfamiliar with that, but the idea, at least in the Hebrew scriptures, what this was that this Messiah would be Ancient of Days, Son of God. And yet here is this Pilate questioning him. And the sheer ego of that should be apparent. And what you understand is that he is assuming, he's assuming that it would have been insulting for him to be questioned by Jesus. So it's not as if Pilate would have been okay if Jesus started acting like he was the one in charge. Now you think about yourself. I think we immediately find it insulting, assaulting, to our self-actualization and our right to live to say that someone gets to tell you what to do with your life in every single part of it. I think there's a part of it, if I just walked up to you in the street and I said, there is someone who has an absolute right to govern every single second and moment of your life. And how many would just instantly react and bristle at the thought that no one gets to tell me what to do. I govern my own life. But this is the default position, or this is the default position of Pilate. It's the default position of us. Who gets to be the interrogator? Who gets to ask the question? Who needs an answer? Asking if Jesus is the King of the Jews doesn't come from any real sense of curiosity, of, is this the one that's really going to come and save Israel, reign over the world? It's coming from a presupposition that Pilate deserves answers. And if he doesn't get them, you pay the price. Again, who here is really okay with the idea of someone else commanding our lives? It's the very essence of sin. The essence of sin is to hate the idea that the one who made me has the right to tell me how to live my life. But isn't it inherent in the idea that God made me? Who should answer to who? If there is a God, does it really make sense to think that we judge him? Well, Good Friday represents exactly that human inclination to put God on the judgment stand. And the amazing thing is, God allows it to happen. That Jesus is allowing this to happen, and in a way, it's to point out the grave injustice that happens when we put ourselves in that place of judgment. When sinful, foolish, arrogant people are put in a place of judgment, we are demonstrating why we are worthy of God's judgment, because we do not judge rightly. Pilate condemned himself when he asked these questions, when he makes these, when he does not put himself in a position to hear from him. And why would he? He's the governor. He's the one with the power. He's the one with the authority. And yet Jesus, of course, answers with a question. Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Now, some of this is that Jesus is being very careful to not condemn himself and to, I think, give Pilate an opportunity to think about it. This is a very gracious thing for Jesus to answer with a rhetorical question. It's not just to, it's not just to weasel out of it. He's giving him a chance to think about this. Why are you really asking this? What's really driving this? Of course, Pilate's already made a judgment, right? When Jesus said that his was not a worldly kingdom, my kingdom is not of this world, that was obvious enough to Pilate. Why? Jesus could not be a king in any rational, normal sense of the word. After all, what is Pilate used to? He's seen the Caesar. The Caesar was the most powerful man in the world. He had palaces, he had fancy robes, he had chariots and parades and countless attendants and slaves. He already knew that Jesus wasn't a king just by looking at him. When Jesus was arrested, was he wearing fine jewelry and fine clothes? No, he's just wearing his normal kind of tunic. It's a very simple robe at the time. Even that, they took that from him. He wasn't wearing anything fancy. How did he ride into Jerusalem a week before? Lamborghinis or Porsches? No, the finest horses? No, he came riding in on a donkey. Who were his cohorts and his friends and his community? Was it the rich and the powerful and the famous? Fishermen, tax collectors, prostitutes. And guess what? Even they abandoned him. I mean, what kind of person do you have to be that even those would just flee? His own people, the Jews, were the very ones asking for Jesus' blood. Obviously, Jesus was no king. It's in a way very disingenuous even for Pilate to ask these things. He's almost very aware that this is all a sham. This whole trial's a sham. Now, the problem with asking God to show up in front of you is that if he came in all of his actual glory and power and authority, I don't know why this thought it would just blast your eyeballs out of your head. I mean, it would just, your brain would not conceive of it. And that's almost what Jesus is insinuating. If my kingdom were here, do you think you'd be even sitting there to interrogate me? In other passages, it says, I would have 12 legions of angels here to fight for me. And so my prayer is blast your eyeballs right out of your head. If God really were to appear, what do you think it would be like? You wouldn't be able to stand or speak before the living God who creates galaxies and black holes, who created life. I mean, we can hardly describe, philosophers and scientists, what really life is. And this God who can see into your very soul. You don't get to just have a dialogue with him if he were to really reveal his divinity, his eternity. Come on. And yet, if God, think of this then, what's the alternative? Well, if God presented himself as a very slick politician with the nice cars, surrounded by looking people, wearing designer clothes, you'd either be jealous of him or judge him. Just imagine your favorite or your least favorite politician, powerful politician, standing in front of Pilate. If a person with some standing and some clout and seem to have some kind of influence and authority, Pilate would either see you as a threat or as an ally. And if God were to stand before you, dressed up, real nice, seeming like someone important, like the president or something, you would, how would you respond to that? You probably wouldn't even, some of us imagine, going up to the president, whichever one it is you choose, and just giving him an earful, right? You just imagine you would do that. But I don't know. I think we would maybe not take that route. So if you would feel that way about a politician, really, do you think you stand before God? And if you are yourself a powerful person, you just see other people as, greater power, lower power, and, okay, you're a threat, you're an ally, and that kind of analysis. But is that how you want to imagine God if you're going to meet with him? But what about if God did this then? Absolute most jaw-droppingly unexpected thing? What if he presented himself as a normal person, absolutely good, honest, humble, servant-like? Would you be impressed by that? Would that convince you about who God is and that he exists? Or would you question that a person had any authority or power over your life at all? Which is it? You want your eyeballs blasted out of your head? Or do you want someone that is so humble and subservient, you say, this can't possibly be God, because this is a nobody come riding in on a donkey. Good Friday is the reminder that God chose to present himself to us, not as a ruler with thousands and thousands of soldiers at his beck and call, but a slave, a servant who would take care of the consequences of my sin by becoming a human with all of our weaknesses and frailty and hungers, temptations too, yes, but without sin. Do you really know how to handle that? These skeptics talk about that. Do they really know how to handle that kind of presentation of God? Or would they do exactly what Pilate did and say, this guy's nobody? Why are they even making a fuss about this guy? But God did exactly that to shame the wisdom and power of rulers and governors and experts and religious leaders and social media influencers, because no one really expects God to be gloriously humble. Yes, Jesus was definitely pretty harsh to the religious leaders who should have known better. He was very harsh to them. But if Jesus right now were to, indulge some skeptic, one of these guys on the internet says, well, if God's real, he'd just, show him, he needs to show himself to me right here, right now. But if Jesus were to indulge that the way he did here with Pilate, what would they experience? Staggering humility? Yes. And what would that do? That would either break you, make you cry out, God, how could you be so humble? It doesn't make any sense. You're the ruler and creator of all things. How could you serve me, a sinner? Or you would judge that humility as weakness and deception, which is basically what Pilate did. He keeps questioning, so you are a king. I mean, again, he's just indulging, this kind of masquerade. Jesus, again, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. And in a way, I think Pilate's just trying to find something to justify, punish him, because obviously the Jews were not just going to let Jesus go. Pilate needed to do something. Can I get something to stick? Can he just incriminate himself somehow, some way? And Jesus sees through that. But Pilate, throughout this whole thing, he sees himself as having authority over the whole situation. All the cards are in his hand. He has all the power. He's the one that's, he's dominating this conversation. What's the only thing that Jesus has? The truth. Because he is the truth. And truth is true no matter whether you're wearing robes or Versace, whether you're the prisoner or the guard, whether you're the Caesar or the carpenter of the Caesar. Truth is true. And if God were to appear before any of us, I highly doubt he's going to try to persuade you or me to believe in him by conjuring up magic tricks to compel you to believe. It didn't work on Moses, actually, because he still didn't want to be God's man. It didn't really work on the Egyptians either, because they copied those same tricks. No. Often, even in the Gospels, the miracles of Jesus, the signs and the wonders he did, it produced controversy. Sometimes the exact wrong response people would have to the miracles. They tried to, force him to make more bread and more fish. They sought him just for the miracles. And then the religious leaders, they wanted signs. And Jesus said, adulterous generation seeks after signs, No. What Jesus would do and what he offered to Pilate wasn't proofs of his deity through miracles. Jesus reduced his ministry to one purpose here. He summed it up. This one thing, bearing witness to the truth. Truth about the character and nature of God. Truth about our own broken, sinful, selfish lives. And the ultimate truth that he would have to die and 3 days later rise again for our sins. Truth is what he was about. And the only retaliation Pilate could possibly have when you are faced with that, when God himself just says, hey, truth is truth, I am the truth. The only thing he can say, well, what is truth? That's what I think most people actually confronted by God would eventually say. They'd try to back God into a corner. God, prove yourself, all these things. But ultimately, if their heart is not right with God or aware of their sin, they're going to reject truth. That's really, make no mistake, when Pilate says, what is truth? He's rejecting truth. He's saying there is no truth. He's saying there's no way to know truth. He's saying that his version of truth is more true than Jesus' version of truth, which means that if everyone's truth is true, there's no such thing as true. God, to say we can't know what truth is, fundamentally, is to make a mockery of God, because God is true, and it's to mock even our own existence. It's to say that we can know nothing, and yet here you are. Is it true that you exist or not? How can you say what is truth? God doesn't need to prove himself to anyone. Our ability to reject truth means that our issue is a heart issue. It's not a brain logic issue, because I think, again, it's very obvious that there's a God. But what we don't want is for him to tell us how to live. What we don't want is for him to say, you need to be perfect as I am perfect. What we don't want is you need to love me more than anything, and you need to love your neighbor as yourself. We don't want to hear that. Pilate shows us here what is in all of us. Being uncomfortable with the idea that God might actually think some things are right and some things are wrong. And we don't match up to that because we have our own definitions of right and wrong. That's the uncomfortable truth of what is truth. And given the option, what we will do is make God wrong before we'll make ourselves wrong. And if we can, make sure that he cannot tell us that we are wrong. Which is why Pilate eventually agreed, conceded to have Jesus be crucified. Now, Pilate may have been directly responsible for assigning Jesus' death sentence, but all sinners are responsible for putting Jesus on the cross. The cross represents our willingness to nail God to a cross before we will let God tell us how to live. And yet, it was ultimately God who intended these events to take place so that he could demonstrate our sinfulness, our wickedness, and how in love he would, rather than pour out his judgment, his eternal wrath on sinners, pour it out on his Son instead. Ironically, the last words of Pilate are recorded in John 19:22. John 19:22 was the last things that the Gospels record Jesus saying, "What I have written, I have written." What did Pilate write? Verse 19. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Of course, the Jews protested. No. Just say that he said that he was the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, "I've written what I have written." In Latin, the phrase is Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum. Or if you've ever seen the letters INRI, you ever see that over the top of crosses, INRI? Jesus starts with an I, Nazarenus, and Rex R. Judaicorum, which is Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. His last recorded words, whether he intended it or not, whether he understood the truth or not, happened to be the most true thing in all of history. The very man who said, "What is truth?" standing in front of Jesus, his last recorded words are, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, what I have written, I have written. Pontius Pilate is virtually unknown in history. The main way that we know of him is through Christian literature, a little bit of Josephus. It wasn't until June 1961 that archaeological evidence for the existence of a Roman governor by the name of Pontius Pilate was discovered on an inscription on a limestone block that read, "From Pilate, prefect of Judea, to Tiberius Caesar Augustus." So he had built something, given something, and dedicated it to his Caesar. We didn't find that until 1961. Prior to that, it's almost like, did Pontius Pilate even exist outside of our records here? Yet, the inscription that Pilate wrote over the head of Jesus has resounded for 2,000 years, known amongst millions and millions of people. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, that truth that he happened to actually affirm, whether he personally knew it or not. He couldn't help but say it, to speak it, to affirm it. Men and women and children who had the humility to recognize their own sin and that the humble king died for their sins and rose again so that they could be co-regents and co-heirs of the king, have believed in that truth that Pilate wrote. Good Friday is about the vindication that this world, this universe, is run by God who planned the beginning the end from the beginning, who is the very definition of truth because he made all things. He defined all things, and he has revealed his truth ultimately in the life, death, resurrection, and return of Jesus Christ. Truths that are written in the pages of human history and written in this book. Are you waiting for God to present his case to you or to show up while you're having breakfast to finally indulge you in an interview? He has already given you truth. If you haven't put your faith in Jesus, understand that when you die, you won't be the one interrogating God, asking for him to give an account to you for how you lived your life and how he didn't do this or that. No, when you stand before God, on the day you die, it will be him interrogating you. What did you do with this life I gave you? What did you do with that testimony day by day I gave you? Every sunrise and sunset, an affirmation of my love, my power, my wisdom, my beauty. What did you do with that? And if you cannot give an account for it, you will be judged according to your sin, according to that very sin that says, God, I'd rather do things my way then you be right. And the consequence of that is eternal separation, judgment, condemnation from God. But if you stand in that day, when God asks you to give an account, and your plea is, nothing in my hands I bring, only to the cross I cling, he'll welcome you in. Not just, all right, I guess I'll let you in, but he will welcome you in as a son, as a daughter, as an heir to the throne of heaven. We've been talking about that on Sundays. Tonight, if you do have questions, real questions, not Pontius Pilate questions, real questions about the Bible, about who God is, about what Jesus has done, get those answered. Talk to me or talk to Pastor Chris or Bing or any of the folks up here that on the stage. We're all part of this church. We love to answer any questions you have about the Bible, or just look for someone who looks like they care about you, right? They're probably a part of our church, I hope, and ask them these questions. Investigate. Let God's truth reveal to you. The only hope we have in this life for something good is Jesus Christ.